urban permaculture. Oh, and has since then ended up working as a consultant to some developers similar to the ones that Taoufik was talking about and other contexts in terms of helping to bring in the knowledge of what agriculture is into new housing and strategies for entire cities like Mississauga. I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to summarize all of their profiles, but just for a bit of context. And I'll pass it to them for a few remarks and reactions, questions, for maybe about 6 minutes or so each. And then we will open it up further to everyone. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I must say thank you also to the presenters, Christine and Taoufik, for the very interesting presentation looking at urban agriculture. Toronto is a very diverse city, and diversity is very dear to us as a city, one of the most diverse cities in the world. And listening to the presentation, planners, I know Taoufik speak briefly about low-income communities, and that was my area of focus, working in Toronto in underserved communities, intentionally for people of low income to have access to food to supplement income. As a priority, we look at the areas that our communities are food insecure. My first question, and this is to Christine, what kind of support do urban agriculture in Paris receive from the municipal government?
It works? It works? Yes, it works. Then it receives, as I said, for example, in Paris, there is a specific program called Pariculteur, which is one of the main forms of supporting, urban agriculture, allowing, for example, accessibility to roofs or to ground spaces. We have not a lot of ground spaces in Paris, but as I understand, it's also the case in Toronto. That's one of the main things. And another thing which is more recent is that regarding the very huge crisis of low-income populations to feed them, there are now an emerging program about the direct an experiment of what we call a common comment on appelle ça, une caisse commune de l'alimentation. A common way of buying of common budget in some poor district to buy food with specific prices to local markets is beginning. I mean, I have no results to give for you for the moment, but it's really a growing preoccupation. And we are, as I said, with the Red OPA we made with the chair, we are trying to support them and to help them to make the inquest, to make the work about the realization of this type of support, of new support.
Okay. And is there a department in the municipal government specifically for urban agriculture?
Yes, it was created in 2015, something like that, which it was before that, but the DEV, I mean the Direction of Environment, and which is now the Direction of Environment, which is in responsibility for urban agriculture, is the main responsible of that. But now, from 2 years, new departments are emerging, such as the departments of sustainable food for Paris, which are also involved in development more of relationship between the city and the peri-urban market gardeners, so as to supply fresh food with good prices for the district where the majority of population has low income.
I was really struck by in particular the comment, Taoufik, about home gardeners not being able to build, or having to be a challenge around, or having to slow down in their building if they're actually impacting gardens. And I'm really curious to hear just a little bit more about that, if you would.
I don't hear you again.
I'll try again.
Okay. Wait.
I was really struck by the comment about home gardens not being able to build or be built upon without some sort of conversation. And I was just wanted to understand a little bit more about that. That's not a pattern we have here, and it's very interesting to hear about. So just curious about that.
Okay. I again, with the point of view of urban planning world, in France, the urban plans are, you can say, a lot of rules are integrated in the plans, and the rules avoid to change the aspects of building or the aspect of garden sometimes, because, for instance, you have to let rain go in the soil, or in other cases, you have to respect patrimonial or historical, I don't know, building or area not far from your house. So you have to ask for a permit. I think that it is changing because they have to consider the rules for the historical aspects, or I don't know, for the rain. But add to this the other obligation that municipalities or urban developers want to add about agriculture, or which kind of plants you have the right to use or not. And they want to avoid some plants which are stranger from the area, or some plants which consume a lot of water, for instance.
Right. It's really interesting. Go ahead.
And this question is for Christine again. In Christine's presentation, she presented on the open access method, and you spoke about territorial diagnosis.
different stakeholders, inhabitants, different types of inhabitants, elected people, technical services, etc. And then this step of diagnosis allows to decide on a common consensus, if possible, that the form or the forms of urban agriculture that will be adapted to this territory.
Thank you. I know it's such a rich environment that you've painted for us with so many different opportunities and groups. And I'm wondering where the highest energy or potential is in the continued development of urban agriculture, because you've spoken about the garden fronts, and then there's the university programs and all the different levels of government engagement. Probably there's economic drivers. So I'm just curious where the highest energy is and movement forward.
For me, okay. Ça fait la patate chaude. Okay, of course, we give you a lot of ideas to have in French we say kaleidoscope, a lot of images to have the beginning of the picture. Okay, let's begin by the training. Christine present you what AgroParisTech and Christian Aubry in particular begin to prepare professionals who know how to design, to think urban agriculture. So you have the first field where yes, you can say energy to change and to develop urban architecture. I think there is training in different places, not only in classical, like here in university or schools as our school. I think that I don't know for Christine, but we meet a lot of people who stop, they work to, I don't know, they worked for 20 years in another field sector, and they don't want to work in banking or etc. And they have training by step, by 1 month here, and after by working in gardens with NGO, etc. And this is a field very important, I think, where to have changes, deep changes in the way to work. The other one is the municipalities in France. Christine gave the example of Paris, but we have a lot of little or middle-sized municipalities which are very involved in work on urban architecture. I have said the markets, for instance. There are a lot of little or middle-sized municipalities which begin to first work on markets because the relation with the architecture, with the producers, with the farmers are very important, because it's their interland. If they don't do anything with them, they die. Okay, the municipality will be, I don't know, only one political representative with a little administration and no inhabitants in the area. So the local authorities, I think, into the local authorities with the administration of local authorities, and the same time in France, okay, the political representative is very important. And perhaps the third field is the how we can say experts, people who know. The word experts is not good. People who have experience and know how to do, and we have to mobilize them to share their knowledge, to share. You see, there's a combination between management with techniques from urban architecture, which plans, and in the same time, how to organize activities with schools, with low-income supports, non-benefits, and these are skills and knowledge that we have to share.
Thank you so much. From myself and Jane, I'll turn it over to Joe, because I shouldn't say experts, but people who know are in this room. Plenty folks who knows. Go ahead, Joe.
Thanks, Anan. Well, it's mostly I want to give an opportunity. I have all these cards spread in front of me and try to cluster them into some maybe to try to get to as many as possible, to cluster them into some themes. I think about 3 of them dealt with the research aspect. I'll make sure to leave that for last, but I'll make sure to save some time for it. Let's start with the governance, the big governance question. There were a couple of questions around that. One is, does Paris have an overall food strategy, of which urban agriculture is a part? We'll start with that question.
Yes, then Paris had more or less food strategy some time ago about, for example, the weight of the self-production through community gardens, shared gardens, etc. That was not really food, but it was more sensibility to food and good food for the whole Parisians. But nowadays, with the crisis, with the necessity of bringing food to lower price, to better qualities, etc., they are developing, and not only Paris city, but the Great Paris, some types of what I called PAT, Projets Alimentaires Territoriaux, and in Paris and in the metropolis of Paris, it will be called the AgroParisTech. That means it's a type of relationship. It's the building of relationships between Paris and the Great Paris, which is a dense part of the Ile-de-France region, 7 million of inhabitants, and the peri-urban and rural zones around. And that means how to organize the food supplying, how to organize it from the production to the consumption. And one of the biggest problem is the problem of logistics. And we are trying now to reuse the river Seine to make this supplying. Reuse because, of course, it was historic, no? But it was totally abandoned. And nowadays, they are trying to reimplant some boats to make this supplying. It's a beginning. And normally, it could have been ready for the Olympic Games. It will not be the case, okay? But it's a beginning, and this new strategies, this metropolitan food plans of the metropolis of Great Paris is really a new way of considering that the food supplying of the city is no more a question of wheat markets, is more a question of local organization, even if the local is not only the 2 kilometers around Paris, but yes, it's really a new preoccupation and a big one.
Thanks, Christine. I'll switch to Taoufik with I'll just two specifically planning questions. One is, if a developer has incorporated urban agriculture in a building, but that structure is later sold, does the urban agriculture element need to be maintained by law by the new owner? So kind of how does this, maybe to broaden it a bit, how does change in use and ownership is factored into the new urban agriculture projects? And maybe I'll just share the second question, and that is how do planners start their planning process? Are they using some the traditional types of landscape approaches or permaculture approaches to planning? I mean, is there exposure? Is there knowledge of newer?
Okay, the second one is the easier. Perhaps I'll give a fast my generalize rapidly, but they don't use really this kind of solution or technical organization. We have experiences rare in some projects, as I know, with permaculture, for instance. But it's not the idea of the urban planners. The experience I know is the idea of, for instance, person from an engineer we work there, or someone the manager of a park who propose to adopt this kind of solution. But planners are not yet familiar with this kind of with this kind of solution. The first, I hope I understand the question. It's about the building and
building, but also in general the new projects being created. The new projects being created, with that integrate urban agriculture into, whether it's the roof or common spaces, whatever it is. How do they factor in change? If there's new owners, if there's some other company buys it, how do they ensure that this survives with the...
in France, for I don't know, Christine perhaps can complete the answer. All the projects I know, it's public organization, municipalities, or public agencies who are owner of the spaces where urban agriculture is developed. They help, they support by giving the land or giving a low rent cost, and they stay the owner of the land or the building of the roof for, I don't know, for a long time, because for some of them, in few cases, the owner are the property or les copropriétés, the co-owners, like condominium, and they add it in the contract when they sell the land, and when they sell the building, they write that they can't change anything in the roof, on the roof, on the gardens, but a contract is a contract. I don't know if it will be respected in few years. Some municipalities are thinking about having rules even in private spaces in order to make it more securized. I don't know how to say it. It's not easy, because in France, as in Canada, of course, there is law and there is something which is property, private property, so you can't add obligation. There is something which is called constitution, okay, and we try to find the good balance between obligation for, of course, public interest or common interest and private interest. So municipalities, I know that some municipalities want to do this in what we call police because French municipalities have a lot of power with rules, and in the other hand, they can also use the plans to put in the plans rules about what we call servitude, which is obligation for public and common interest. So servitude publique, you have to have garden there, even if it's a private space.
I'll shift back to Christine. Two related questions around the pariculture program, but I think also the projects that were created. One is, you explained that most vertical urban farming projects in Paris failed. Your ideas why and what could be different in Canada, and a question about the pariculture program, which, to clarify, is not the only particular, maybe enabled some vertical projects to happen, but they were not all. That's some other types of projects happen through pariculture. But the question is, how has the pariculture rooftop growing initiative moved away from the common interest, if that's the case?
Yes, and first for the first question, when I spoke about vertical farming, we have to distinguish two types of things. First, the use of rooftop in open air, which is for us and for pariculture not really vertical farming. It's just the use of the roof for making agriculture and generally agroecological agriculture, permaculture, and so on. That's a point. And in this case, we can do gardening, collective gardening, micro farms, and so on. Generally, it's not very productive, but it can be, and it's more multifunctional with a use for food production, a use for educational, a use, etc. When I spoke about vertical farming, I'm speaking more about indoor farming, which was very, very publicized and very supported by public funds some years ago, because of the promise of revolutioning the food systems with indoor production of vegetables. The results is that there is no economic possibilities for this type of things. When in France we have the chance to have a very diverse climate and very good climates for open air production generally, then it is not a necessity for us to have this type of systems. And these systems are very expensive to set up and very expensive to function and very energy consumers, even with a nuclear grid as we have in France. Then after some years, the majority of these indoor farms who were then very hardly supported, included by the state, have failed on economic point of view. They have also failed because there are no really a public wanted to eat strawberries coming from indoor farming when you have strawberries coming from other types of agriculture. Then this global alimentary food indoor farming have failed, with the exception of mushroom production, because it is very adapted to urban conditions since centuries. It's not a new thing. And with the exception of some very specific filière, for example, of cosmetic plants, where we need to control very strictly the production, the environment of the production, to have some molecules in the plants. But it's totally different to do that, and you do not need to do that in urban conditions. Better for this type of indoor farming to be near the factories and not in urban condition. But it's not another thing than doing lettuce or radishes or strawberries in these systems which were not adapted to our conditions. But I can understand that it is different in other conditions. When we are working with people in Emirates or in Singapore or perhaps in Canada, I can understand it's different, but we are not obliged in France to make the same thing as others if we don't need. Okay, that's what I wanted to say.
I have time for two quick, well, it's hard to choose. I'll ask one question that has to be asked about change, and also I'll finish with a question. Sorry, about the three questions dealt with research and your researchers and the collaboration. So I'll cluster them in one. So just one question about and to either about the impact on urban agriculture of recent changes over the last 3-4 years, COVID, Black Lives Matter, etc. What has we know? I think many of the people here have been exposed and dealt with it for the last few years. So perhaps briefly, if one of you want to just give a sense of what changes were caused by these sort of revolutionary or dramatic. Well, we can add climate change perhaps as in terms of just the very recent past, what's happening that. Or is that too big of a question? But maybe I should, you know what? This, let's put it this way. This was a question that was important to ask. Well, let's not answer it now. We'll do that over the coffee break. So let me go to the other question that perhaps is easier to answer. Let me just ask, I just want to make sure to bring in the research question here. Surprisingly, perhaps 3 people asked in some way about research. To convince property owners to build urban farms, how important is it to provide arguments backed by research? That's question number 1. Number 2, about the specific to Christine, about the quick progress where your research activities led to many requests from municipalities for advice. What was the most important aspect in gaining trust around that? And the third question is, how are local diverse communities in youth engaged in participatory research in developing urban agriculture projects? So 3 different dimensions to the research and practice question. We have limited time we don't want to eat to either the break or but a few minutes, 5 minutes and this is for both, but you go first. You have one specific to you.
And I will try some answer for some of this question. Regarding perhaps the second one, why to provide arguments from research to municipalities or what? First of all, I think is to try to avoid bad choice who would be regretted for some years by municipalities, because as the urban space are very scarce, the needs of communities, of human communities in the cities are very high and very diverse. It's very important to try to have a methodology to avoid the great stupid choice. Perhaps not to make the best choice, but to avoid the great stupidities. And we didn't avoid all the great stupidities included in Paris Culture. Because generally, and we will work with Paris Culture, I hope this year or at the end of this year, about their failure. What are the projects who are failed because they do not exist now, or because they exist and they have no the function they were built for? And there are not a lot, but there are some examples, and we have to work with the municipality to try to understand why, to manage better the future one. I think that the research has this role to bring methodologies to bring more or less a neutral vision about what is it possible to do or not possible to do.
Okay. For the research, two answers. The first one, that the research, I play my role of research. It's not here to give evidence. No, it's his role, I think, is to have methods and indicators to make the good decision, even if the decision is to not to build or create a farm. Sometimes it's not adapted, sometimes it's not the good place. And as you know, there is a lot of things requested and needed. And sometimes we need other functions on some buildings. The second answer is yes, research is here to help, in particular with owners, to have the more precise choices and design in order to avoid not a failure, but that's the architecture, the activities developed and the farms, for instance, created, don't stop after 3 or 4 or 5 years of activities. We saw this. I see some farmers who try to develop with urban developers some farms, and they stopped after 2 or 3 years. And this is, I think, the impact of this kind of experience is very bad, because municipalities, professionals, urban planners, urban developers will say, of course, see there in Marne Valley, the farmers try to develop a farm during three years, and they don't success, so it doesn't work. Don't try, it doesn't work. And in the urban planners world, the experience and the reputation is very, very important. So if we help to design something with urban architecture, we have to use the indicators, the methods, and in the indicators, last thing I think is for the research, the link between techniques and socioeconomics criteria is the link, the gap. We haven't enough knowledge about it. We haven't enough database, and we haven't enough, because the discussion and the debate, when you have to decide, finally, the discussion is about economical aspects, and we have to convince that you have to think about it in the long term, but in short term. When we had more evidence on the long-term benefits in the economic and social aspects, I think we have the good approach with, in particular, owners.
Thank you, and perhaps Jane, some of this discussion at the end, in particular, can be followed up at the coffee in terms of what to do to avoid the importance of avoiding failure. And thanks a lot, Jane, Anan, Christine, and Taoufik. So yes.